Welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of Allies in Action, the podcast. Our first episode is called A Human Right and Other Lies They Told Me. It's about the youngest Indigenous female elected official in British Columbia who had to resign from the stress of overt racism as she struggled to represent her people. At the age of 21, Jessica McCallum-Miller is the youngest Indigenous woman and the youngest official to be elected in British Columbia, Canada. By 25, she was elected to the City Council of Terrace, British Columbia, a small city in northern British Columbia. 2.5 years later, she had suffered a public breakdown and resigned from council with suicide on her mind, a mere shell of herself. 1 year after hiding from the media, her community, and sometimes herself, she reemerged to file a human rights complaint with the Supreme Court of British Columbia, citing racism and other various offenses. She didn't traverse this surreal political experience and its fallout alone. She had a generous spiritual help of Gladys Radek, an Indigenous sister and grandma, who helped her spiritually awaken from the devastation to rise again from the ashes of the failed human rights in this country in 2022. Jessica is joined by Gladys today. And this story, it really begins literally a stone's throw from the council chambers, but years before. A life lived in dark shadows, brothels, and the forests of northern BC, along the highway of tears, where the truth of prey, predators, and power continues to today. Childhood. Jessica, your childhood was one that seems hard to have survived and to go on to become such a successful young woman, professional, and politician. Your story, though, is to be truly tough to tell, and I know it isn't entirely different than many girls living in the small towns in northern British Columbia, and frankly, around the world. Your courage to have this conversation and to help educate and inspire and lead is a gift, and Allies in Action wants to thank you for that. I'd like to begin with your earliest childhood memory. What were those years like? Why don't we start there?
Yeah, okay. I came from a broken home. I lived in poverty most of my life. And it was hard, it was difficult. I was thankful for what I had as a kid, though I didn't really know that we were that poor. My mother suffered from really terrible addiction issues. So there were times where she wasn't there and I didn't know where she was. I always tried to look on the brighter side of my younger sister as well, and just reassure her, she's coming back, we'll see her. And I struggled with that a lot. I missed her terribly. She was an amazing person. She was a journalist and just went down a very terrible path because of the trauma that she had faced in her life. And she ended up getting into some prostitution. And there are many men who are predatory. And she just fell into that. And I would miss her, so I would run away. Dad, he was a single dad at the time, raising my sister and I. And I didn't understand the situations that I was walking sometimes. And there were also who were homeless. I've stayed in the women's shelter when I was a kid, and but it was good because we had a packed lunch and we were driven to school every day. It was good. That's a resource that we're lacking now, even. But yeah, I think it was the turning point in my young life was really when I lived with my mother. I was rebellious, you know. I didn't understand much at the time. I just wanted to be near her. I wanted to take care of her too. There were times where she had overdosed, and I'd pick her up, and she had showed me CPR on her, and I had to do that. We lived in some low-income housing. She took a lot of people in. She was a mother to a lot of people on the streets as well. She ended up taking a lot of young girls in. And some were just a few years older than me at the time. I was about 12 and 13. So they would always encourage me, the working girls in the house, and tell me, you know, you need to stay in school. I wish that I had stayed in school. You need to do that. You need to go to school, honey. And so I took it to heart. One of those girls is now gone. She was murdered. She was 19 years old when she was murdered.
Have they ever found the person who murdered her, Jessica?
No. And she was like an older sister to me. I had never had that. And my mom looked out for me too. There were men that frequented our house, and you know, did pay the women, right, for their services. And my mother always me. She always, you know, kept them away from me. I had my own section, and it was terrible. It was very bad. Sometimes they were, you know, the men would bring their children, and I would be in a room separate watching the children. You know, just making sure that they could eat. I learned how to steal at a young age to feed myself. I'll never do that. I'll never have to do that again. After that, I had a voice, you know. I was surrounded by so many, even young men that frequented the place, and I was in danger. And my grandma always wanted to make sure that I was okay. She would always tell me, you know, to be careful, because so many young Indigenous women are gone now, that you can't be around this. And so I made the choice to continue going to school. And I moved in with my grandparents on their farm, and I learned some discipline, and I learned a lot of my grandmother's wisdom. She really taught me how to look into myself and look forward to a better life. I think she wanted that for me because she didn't get that. But yeah, from there, I really changed. I saw a path forward. And my mother passed away about 2 years after that, when I was 15. She had bone cancer, and likely her addiction would have taken her through an overdose. She could have likely been murdered, or her bone cancer would have taken her, but she died in a car wreck on her way to an appointment to get a biopsy on her leg cancer. And so that was devastating. That was extremely devastating.
Jessica, what do you think, what was the difference between your mother's generation and your generation in terms of your grandma being able to help you and maybe not being able to help your mom in the same way? Was
So,
there a difference? Had your mom gone through traumas herself?
yeah, yeah. Well, she grew up she was a child of the 70s, and she grew up in the 80s, and she was, she worked hard, she played hard, and that's how she was really. She's very charismatic, and I think that she had gone through some abusive relationships, and um, she did get into the drugs at a young age. And when she was 19, she had finally gone to rehab, a rehabilitation facility down south. She was sent there. And that's actually my parents met. Yeah. I think the difference between those generations, um, it's just the times that we're living in, right? I think my grandmother was able to help me, because she got me at the right time. She recognized where the timing was, where my mother had really gone off the path, and she picked me up exactly at the right time.
Gladys Radek, you are a grandmother to Jessica. Jessica's talked about abject poverty, having to steal to get food, young women having to sell themselves because there really aren't a lot of other things for, particularly that generation, for young Indigenous women to grab onto. Gladys, did you see a lot of the same happening as you were growing? Has anything really changed in northern BC in terms of the opportunities for young people, for young Indigenous women specifically?
Having been raised in the north, yes, I was raised with a foster care system here in the same community as Jess, which is how I knew her grandmother. And we also have to remember that her grandmother and myself are from the residential school era, where there was a lot of drinking, masking, addictions, and that, trying to mask the pain that our parents and our ancestors had lived through. We were living through the violence that was brought back from the residential school era, where a lot of the people that did attend those schools came back to their communities, and we ended up turning to be violent drunks, and because of the atrocious ways that we were treated in those residential schools. I didn't go to a residential school. I'm a product of the violence is real. And when you're raised with alcohol, drugs, and a lot of our people were masked in that pain, and to this day are still suffering from the residential school era. I know that my dear friend Jessica's grandmother, she hasn't drank for years, neither have I. But that doesn't mean that we weren't raised with it. We're all alcoholics. Some of us have just chosen to stay away from it because we know what it does to our people and the damages that it does to our people.
Thank you. You never felt safe living in the brothel or the house where the human trafficking was happening. You were 15, or probably earlier than that, you learned that multiple predators were in your community. Were these men just Caucasian? Were they Indigenous as well? Were they all types of men?
Some of the men were even authority figures. I think that they come from all different backgrounds. We call the North the Wild West up here because there's there's a lot of rainforest. There's a huge stretch of highway. There are men that make plans to frequent up here to abuse the women. And I think that they're from all over. I also think that some are close to home. I've had men harass me on the street. I've had to run away from vehicles. I have really gone through quite a lot. I think every single Indigenous woman you talk to will have a story where they're abused or put in a very life-threatening situation, or survived. We know someone, we all have those stories.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about those stories. If you'd all like to join us in our next segment, that'll be segment 2, episode 1, A Human Right and Other Lies They Told Me. We'll continue our discussion with Jessica McCallum-Miller and Gladys Radek.